Hi, my name is Corrie, and we continue reading today out of Corrie ten Boom's book, The Hiding Place. We are busy with chapter 1, and we just continue from their 100th birthday party. The BG was more crowded than ever when I got back. The alley so jammed with bicycles, I had to leave mine in the corner. The mayor of Haarlem was there in his tailcoat and gold watch chain, and the postman and the trolley motorman and half a dozen policemen from the Haarlem police headquarters just around the corner. After lunch, the children started coming, and as children always did, they went straight to father. The older ones sat on the floor around him. The smallest ones climbed into his lap. For in addition to his twinkling eyes and long cigar-sweet beard, father ticked. Watches lying on the shelf run differently from watches carried about, and so father always wore the ones he was regulating. His suit jackets had 4 huge inside pockets, each fitted with hooks for a dozen watches, so that wherever he went, the hum of hundreds of little wheels went gaily with him. Now, with a child on each knee and 10 more crowded clothes, he drew from another pocket his heavy, cross-shaped winding key, each of the 4 ends shaped for a different size clock. With a flick of his finger, he made it spin, gleaming, glinting. Betsy stopped in the doorway with a tray of cakes. He doesn't know there's anyone else in the room, she said. I was carrying a stack of soiled plates down the stairs when a little shriek below told me that Pickwick had arrived. We used to forget, we who loved him, that what a shock the first sight of him could be for a stranger. I hurried down the door, introduced him hastily to the wife of an Amsterdam wholesaler, and got him upstairs. He sank his ponderous bulk into a chair beside father, fixed one eye on me, the other on the ceiling, and said, 5 lumps, please. Poor Pickwick. He loved children as much as father did, but while children took father on sight, Pickwick had to win them. He had one trick, though, that never failed. I brought him his cup of coffee, thick with sugar, and watched him look around in mock consternation. But my dear Cornelia, he cried, there's no table to set it on. He glanced out of one wide-set eye to make sure the children were watching. Well, it's a lucky thing I brought my own. And with that, he set the cup and saucer on his own protruding pouch. I had never known a child who could resist it. Soon, a respectful circle had gathered round him. A little later, Nolly and her friend arrived. Tante Corrie! Peter greeted me innocently. You don't look 100 years old. And before I could swat him, he was sitting in Tante Jance's upright piano, filling the old house with melody. People called out requests, popular songs, selections from Bach chorales, hymns, and soon the whole room was joining in the chorus. How many of us were there that happy afternoon who were soon to meet under very different circumstances? Peter, the policeman, dear ugly Pickwick, all of us were there except my brother Willem and his family. I wondered why they should be so late. Willem and his wife and children lived in the town of Hilversum, 30 miles away. Still, they should be here by now. Suddenly, the music stopped, and Peter from his perch on a piano bench hissed across the room, "Opa! Here's the competition!" I glanced out the window. Turning into the alley were Mr. and Mrs. Khan, owners of the other watch shop on the street. By Haarlem standards, they were newcomers, having opened their store only in 1910, and so been on the Barteljorestraat a mere 27 years. But since they sold a good many more watches than we did, I considered Peter's comment factual enough. Father, however, was distressed. "Not competitors, Peter," he said reprovingly. "Colleagues." And, lifting children quickly off his knees, he got up and hurried to the head of the stairs to greet the Khans. Father treated Mr. Khan's frequent visits to the shop below as social calls from a cherished friend. "Can't you see what he's doing?" I would rage after Mr. Khan had gone. "He's finding out how much we're charging so that he can undersell us." Mr. Khan's display window always featured in bold figures prices exactly 5 guilders below our own. And Father's face would lit up with a kind of pleased surprise, as it always did on those rare occasions when he thought about the business side of watchmaking. "But Corrie, people will save money when they buy from him." And then he would always add, "I wonder how he does it." Father was as innocent of business know-how as his father had been before him. He would work for days on a difficult repair problem and then forget to send a bill. The more rare and expensive a watch, the less he was able to think of it in terms of money. "A man should pay for the privilege of working on such a watch," he would say. As for merchandising methods, for the first 80 years of the shop's history, the shutters on the street had been closed each evening promptly at 6 o'clock. It was not until I myself had come into the business 20 years ago that I had noticed the throngs of strollers crowding the narrow sidewalks each evening, and had seen how the other stores kept their windows lighted and open. When I pointed this out to Father, he was as delighted as though I had made a profound discovery. "And if people see the watches, it might take them want to buy one. Corrie, my dear, how very clever you are." Mr. Khan was making his way toward me now, full of cake and compliments. Guilty for the jealous thoughts I had harbored, I took advantage of the crowd and made my escape downstairs. The workroom and shop were even more crowded with well-wishers than the upstairs rooms. Hans was passing cakes in the back room, as was Tours in the front, wearing the nearest thing to a smile that her perpetually down-drawn lips would permit. As for Christoffels, he had simply and astonishingly expanded. It was impossible to recognize that stooped and shabby little man in the glorious figure at the door, greeting newcomers with a formal welcome, followed by a relentless tour of the shop. Quite obviously, it was the greatest day of his life. All through the short winter afternoon, they kept coming, the people who counted themselves Father's friends. Young and old, poor and rich, scholarly gentlemen and illiterate servant girls, Only to father did it seem that they all were alike. That was father's secret. Not that he overlooked the differences in people, that he didn't know they were there. And still, Willem was not here. I said goodbye to some guests at the door and stood for a moment gazing up and down Barteljorisstraat. Although it was only 4 in the afternoon, the lights in the shop were coming on against the January dusk. I still had a great deal of little sister worship for this big brother, 5 years older than I, an ordained minister, and the only Ten Boom who had ever been to college. Willem saw things, I felt. He knew what was going on in the world. Oftentimes, indeed, I wish that Willem did not see quite so well, for much that he saw was frightening. A full 10 years ago, way back in 1927, Willem had written in his doctoral thesis, done in Germany, that a very terrible evil was taking root in that land, right at the university. Sorry. He said, seeds were being planted of a contempt of human life, such as the world had never seen. The few who had read his paper had laughed. Now, of course, well, people weren't laughing about Germany. Most of the good clocks came from there, and recently several firms with whom we had dealt for years had simply and mysteriously went out of business. Willem believed it was part of a deliberate and large-scale move against Jews. Every one of the closed businesses was Jewish. As head of the Dutch Reformed Church's program to reach Jews, Willem kept in touch with these things. Dear Willem, I thought, as I stepped back inside and closed the door. He was about as good a salesman of the church as father was of watches. Willem didn't try to change people, just to serve them. He had scrimped and saved enough money to build a home for elderly Jews in Hilversum, for the elderly of all faiths. In fact, for Willem was against any system of segregation. But in the last few months, the home had been deluged with younger arrivals, all Jews, and all from Germany. Willem and his family had given up their own living quarters and were sleeping in the corridor. And still, the frightened, homeless people kept coming, and with them tales of a mounting madness. I went up to the kitchen where Nolly had just brewed a fresh pot of coffee, picked it up, and continued with it upstairs to Tante Janse's rooms. What does he want? I asked the group of men gathered around the cake table as I set down the pot. This man in Germany. Does he want war? I knew it was poor talk for a party, but somehow thoughts of Willem always set my mind on hard subjects. A chill of silence fell over the table and spread swiftly around the room. What does it matter? A voice broke into it. Let the big countries fight it out. It won't affect us. That's right, from a watch salesman. The Germans let us alone in the Great War. It's to their advantage to keep us neutral. Easy for you to talk, cried the man from whom we bought clock parts. Your stock comes from Switzerland. What about us? What do I do if Germany goes to war? A war could put me out of business. And at that moment, Willem entered the room. Behind him came Tini, his wife, and their 4 children. but every eye in the room had settled on the figure whose arm Willem held in his. It was a Jew in his early 30s, in the typical broad-brimmed black hat and long black coat. What glued every eye to this man was his face. It had been burned. In front of his right ear dangled a grey and frazzled ringlet, like the hair of a very old man. The rest of his beard was gone, leaving only a raw and gaping wound. "This is Herr Gottlieb," Willem announced in German. "He just arrived in Hilversum this morning. Herr Gottlieb, my father." "He got out of Germany on a milk truck," Willem told us rapidly in Dutch. "They stopped him on a street corner. Teenage boys in Munich set fire to his beard." Father had risen from his chair and was eagerly shaking the newcomer's hand. I brought him a cup of coffee and a plate of Nolly's cookies. How grateful I was now for Father's insistence that his children speak German and English almost as soon as Dutch. Herr Gottlieb sat down stiffly on the edge of the chair and fixed his eyes on the cup in his lap. I pulled up a chair beside him and talked some nonsense about the unusual January weather. And the round-us conversation began again, a hum of party talk rising and falling. "Hoodlums," I heard the white salesman say. "Young hooligans. It's the same in every country. The police will catch up with them. You'll see. Germany's a civilized country." And so the shadow fell across us that winter afternoon in 1937. But it rested lightly. Nobody dreamed that this tiny cloud would grow until it blocked out the sky. And nobody dreamed that in this darkness, each of us would be called to play a role. Father and Betsy and Mr. Khan and Willem, even the funny old Beji with its unmatching floor levels and ancient angles. In the evening, after the last guest had gone, I climbed the stairs to my room, thinking only of the past. On my bed lay the new maroon dress. I had forgotten to put it back on. I never did care about clothes, I thought, even when I was young. Childhood scenes rushed back at me out of the night, strangely close and urgent. Today I knew that such memories are the key, not to the past, but to the future. I know that the experiences of our lives, when we let God use them, become the mysterious and perfect preparation for the work He will give us to do. I didn't know that then, nor indeed that there was any new future to prepare for in a life as humdrum and predictable as mine. I only knew, as I lay in my bed at the top of the house, that certain moments from long ago stood out in focus against the blur of years. Oddly sharp and near they were, as though they were not yet finished, as though they had something more to say. Till next time, goodbye.